Hello, this is Dan Ferrisi, Editor-in-Chief with Commercial Integrator, welcoming you to AV Plus, the podcast for the commercial AV integration industry. We're really excited to be joined today by an expert in a number of the most important areas of the commercial AV industry today, the areas where we're really seeing disruptive innovation. I'm talking about things like platform-based approaches and the software as a service model, the migration to the cloud, etc. An expert on all of those areas is Jay Phillips, who is Chief Revenue Officer with Userful, and we're really excited to have him here today.
As always, please like and subscribe to our YouTube page, and please subscribe to the AV Plus podcast on Apple and on Spotify.
Jay, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate you being on the AV Plus podcast.
Hey, Dan. Hey, thanks. Good to meet you. Good to be here.
So I know you've had a couple of decades of experience, more than that probably, working in companies in the IT area, in the infrastructure space. So you're really an expert about things like not only software as a service, but also the platform-based approach and the benefits thereof. I think platform is a term we're hearing bandied about a lot, and I think there's a lot of power in it, but I think there's still some nebulousness about what exactly the platform approach is. So before we talk about the virtues of it, why don't you define what we're talking about here?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, the platform approach really allows customers to consume typically multiple applications or multiple services from a common interface or a common location. Oftentimes, platforms are loaded onto a single server or to a single location, or be it the cloud, giving the customers an opportunity to consume a specific area of need and then be able to expand to other areas. What we're seeing specifically in the AV space is a lot of companies have traditionally bought, we'll call it command and control for their, we'll call it control center view, or customers who are looking at digital signage or ways to push content to their employees in the remote areas, especially with COVID. And a lot of times you're buying those in isolated, siloed type of solutions with multiple different hardware components. The platform approach allows you to consume maybe one of those as a starting place, but then expand on the same software platform, on the same common hardware infrastructure across to other solutions that might be able to, I call it future-proof, or allow you to be flexible and expand into environments. So the benefit of a platform is really allowing you to kind of, set it and forget it, and to be able to expand seamlessly across different services or different applications.
And that's so critical, isn't it? The idea of trying to future-proof your technology, future-proof your applications, so that a deployment that works beautifully today is not outmoded 2 or 3 or 4 years from now, or you're locked into something that is not going to be scalable and is not going to be able to grow with you as an organization or as a company.
Absolutely. And I think the key to any platform approach is that they're using open standards, different APIs, or hardware that you can get off the shelf, right? You don't want to get locked into proprietary-based hardware that is only suited for that specific company. You want to be able to have the flexibility to be able to, again, whether it's an HP, Dell, whatever the server, Supermicro, whatever the server or hardware architecture of choice might be, that you can leverage that existing infrastructure or leverage the investments you already have. And the goal is really ultimately with these software components is to eliminate as much hardware as you possibly can, especially with the supply chain problems. The ideal is to find software that can, like I said, obviate the need for hardware.
I think that's exactly right. And obviously the supply chain is on the tip of everyone's tongues, as it has been for a couple of years at this point. And we've seen some amelioration of the issue, but we've not seen a real return to the kind of lead times that integrators expect and that their clients want. So getting away from those proprietary approaches that lock you into component availability from any particular vendor is going to be a laudable approach, I think, insofar as so many integrators can't afford to have their projects extended out into the indeterminate future, waiting for a key component that may or may not be available in the next 4 or 5 or 6 months. So I think that certainly is the zeitgeist and the trend of the moment.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about another area of expertise of yours. Now that we understand a bit about platforms, understand a bit about the open standards that you're an advocate of, let's talk about software as a service. I mean, I think one of the things we want to talk about right now, and you've already alluded to it, is the idea of software-defined solutions. I've been in the commercial AV industry, covering the commercial AV industry since 2004, going to events like Infocom, and there was a time when virtually every solution we saw was very bulky, very hardware-centric, oftentimes hundreds of thousands of dollars in some cases. But we're really moving to a much more streamlined approach now, as you said, much less hardware-centric, much more software-defined. What would you say is the origin of that? What do you think is the impetus for why we're going in that direction? And do you feel like that is inexorably where we're going to continue to go?
Absolutely. So first of all, yes, I think it's absolutely where everything is headed right now. Most technology consumers, technologists don't like to talk to humans. And so I always look at software and software as a service in particular as a way to, quickly get your foot in the door, look at different software, solutions. Most customers are 60 to 70% educated before they start looking at software in today's environments. The old days of doing multiple, month or week long, we'll call it proof of concepts, I think are really being replaced with the ability to gain access to software and not have to install significantly large amounts of hardware. I'd say, the origin of this really stems back, I'll date myself here a little. I was with Network Appliance, NetApp, back in the day when, more and more customers were migrating to large applications, right? And VMware was a great disruptor in that environment where they virtualized the server, right, allowing you to leverage and virtualize your compute across these servers. And I think the next disruption that's been taking place is the likes of AWS, Azure, GCP. I spent several years at Amazon Web Services specifically, looking at the amount of workloads leaving the data center and moving into the cloud. And they're really taking advantage of what I call the elasticity approach, the ability to buy what you need when you need it. And so that approach is very critical, I think, when you're looking at buying and consuming software, is to be able to take on, a bit of that, what I'll call consumption or core-based approach, where you buy what you need, and you only pay for what you need when you need it. And I think that approach is really starting to take off. I think the AV industry is ripe for this similar disruption, whereby, you can virtualize more of these pieces and parts or these services onto a common hardware platform. The ability to leverage the cloud in some instances for these services so that you can, have that, we'll call it, benefit of elasticity in the cloud. So just like VMware was disrupting, we'll call it, the server and the application space, virtualizing, the compute, Amazon, Azure, Google were disrupting the applications in the data center. I think there's other companies in the AV over IP space doing the same thing, right? Bringing open standards, open API, platform approach, consumption-based modeling to that environment, and then customers benefit, right? I think at the end of the day, it's, what's going to benefit the customer financially, flexibly, from a scale perspective. Oftentimes customers buy way more than what they need at the time, or they buy into architectures that lock them in for the next 5 to 10 years. And I think flexibility and scalability is going to be the key to going forward in this space. And quite honestly, the disruption I see happening in the AV industry in particular, it's moving over to the IT side of the house. Things are going on the network. More of the IT teams are looking at ways to scale, not just their command and control, but, how do I do my digital signage? How do I do advertising? How do I get to my remote employees more efficiently, more effectively, with common interfaces, with security parameters that are like my, enterprise network and the things that my IT team is looking for. So I think that's where, what I'll call the history of evolution and disruption is coming into the AV space. I think it's probably been a little bit of a laggard compared to other areas of the enterprise where, like I said, VMware and the cloud like AWS is disrupting.
So you've used the word disruption a few times in that answer, and I want to get into exactly what you're talking about. You also mentioned the fact that the AV industry, to some extent, has been a laggard. Commercial Integrator, it's truth in advertising. We write for the commercial integration channel. The integrators are our readers. The integrators are for whom we shape our editorial content. Do you feel like the integrators who are part of the AV channel are willing in broad scale to embrace this disruption, to lean into this disruption, and to some extent reinvent their businesses to focus on these ascendant opportunities? Or do you feel like there are a lot of integrators who are very familiar with the capital project hardware-based approach? They've made millions of dollars and they've fed their families and grown their business for 2 decades, and they're not necessarily looking to be disrupted, so to speak, because what they've done has always worked, and maybe to some extent it's still working, and they don't necessarily see a whole lot beyond the horizon of 22 or 23.
Yeah, I'd say you've got a combination. I think some of the integrators, we'll call it, say, some of the more traditional integrators, have been reluctant to change because they've been used to, we'll call it the margins on reselling hardware. I think the more evolved integrators are starting to realize there's a tremendous amount of services dollars associated with this disruption that's taking place, and wrapping their services dollars, which I believe, in the long run helps them make more money. I saw it in the disruption of the cloud. I mean, a lot of these traditional resellers selling into IT, reselling servers, switches, networks, were disrupted when a lot of these workloads left the data center and went into the cloud, and they didn't pivot themselves quick enough. And I think I'm seeing a lot of some of the more traditional integrators morph themselves into more of a software integration services leveraged approach, which I think is going to pay dividends for them long term, especially as customers look to simplify their environment, future-proof their environment, and quite honestly look to be more cost-effective as the data center shrinks, as hardware, I say, disappears. And I think it's a good thing, because at the end of the day, it becomes kind of an OpEx versus CapEx modeling. And the more customers I talk to, the more they are looking for ways to optimize their spend, and leverage, a software or a software-based model to allow them to do more with less, I guess, is the best route.
It's very interesting because I went to NSCA's Pivot to Profit. NSCA, as I'm sure you probably are well aware, the National Systems Contractors Association, and not-for-profit association to offer kind of playbooks and strategic advice to integrators to run their businesses better. And during one of the presentations there, Kyle Haben, who is an integrator based in Nebraska, I believe his company is Electronic Contracting Company, said something along the lines of, and he was talking kind of exactly about what you're talking about, if AV companies are not already becoming or in the process of being IT companies, they sure had better start to become IT companies. And I kind of ran with that, and I was covering that. And every conversation I had with groups of integrators, I was saying that. And I was surprised by the amount of pushback I got. I mean, we would have, peer-to-peer calls with integrators, and I would say, do you agree? And some portion, maybe not the majority, but some portion said, well, I don't see that at all. I don't see myself as an IT company. I think those are different trades. How calcified is that?
I'd say, I go back to my traditional integrators that were focused purely on hardware and the resale. A lot of them, I'd say, transitioned into a private equity situation, or they ended up shutting their doors because they didn't pivot quick enough. And a lot of what I call their sustainable business was based on reselling, like I said, large large hardware, environments. And the ones who pivoted quickly into more of what I'd call an IT-based approach, looking at how they could optimize applications through their services, migrating applications, like I said, oftentimes migrating applications from the data center to the cloud, or implementing a more what I'll call an enterprise approach through software solutions that are on the market that are quite honestly becoming very disruptive, right? It's eliminating a lot of that hardware. So I always say that there's an opportunity with software disruption for any integrator to pivot to allowing customers to do more with less. Removing hardware from the environment can be a good thing for some of these customers, right? In fact, it's where they want to go. And so if you align your business to that momentum, you're going to get more customers. You're going to get more customers looking for your services, and those services dollars can be very valuable, right? And you become more of a thought leader. you're embracing the disruption. You're not fighting the disruption. You're, taking what I call a very evolved approach to an industry that, like I said, is moving away from proprietary, heavy hardware, isolated, siloed environments to something that's a lot more what I'll call, future-proofing, flexible, scalable, allows you to, quite honestly, I was looking at the solutions that if you decide you want off of that platform, it's easy to get off of those platforms and move on to another one. You're not locked in for 3 to 5 years or more.
So something that I think has been a through line of your answers so far has been the need to be customer centric in the approaches we provide to increase efficiency, increase ease of use, remove hardware that's not necessary, and just kind of streamline client systems. And that I think very much aligns with the zeitgeist of the moment for commercial AV, which is that we are not really technology providers per se, but rather we're experience creators and we're environment cultivators and we're smile generators. We're trying to create memories for people if it happens to be an out-of-home environment. We're trying to facilitate the kind of experiences that they want. Do you feel like that is kind of the best way for AV integrators to think of themselves as experience creators, environment curators? And do you think that if they believe themselves to be that, rather than technology solution providers per se, that's kind of the key to the kingdom of understanding how to lean into disruption and embrace it?
Absolutely. I mean, all the companies I've worked for have been disruptive organizations. I mean, honestly, I come from the IT space. I didn't come from an AV background. And one of the exciting things that I see happening right now in the AV industry is that it's moving toward that experiential feeling. It's what does the customer see when they turn on that software or that solution for the first time? And I think the companies that embrace something that is coined in the software space, especially in SaaS, is called PLG, product-led growth, right? And product-led is really just that. When you're in the product, you're actually getting an experience from the product that allows you to expand it within your environment, within your customer's environment, whether you're in command and control or you're in digital signage, wherever you're at in the company, the solution can actually, help expand and provide benefit and that experience that you're talking about. And so I think you're seeing a lot of SaaS companies move toward what I call a PLG or a product-led approach, where the product is at the forefront of the success of the company. It's not people showing up. It's not salespeople on the phone trying to sell you, but in fact that the product itself provides a massive amount of value, and the experience you're getting is coming from the product, not necessarily more humans or more hardware showing up in your environment. And so to your comment about the experience, I think it really becomes incumbent on the product that companies are providing specific in the software area, and less about like the people that are going to install the hardware. And this is where, like I said, services become a massive part of the approach with a lot of these software companies. Implementing the software, training on the software becomes both a product and a people approach. So it's almost like product assisted or human assisted approach to delivering software and the software experience.
So in terms of network-based approaches, which is, we've been talking quite a bit about that. Obviously, AV over IP is one way to do it. There are other ways. So we just recently did in November our networking deep dive. So we were talking about all the various ways in which integrators use networks to deliver the kind of experiences that you were just talking about, and the various standards and approaches that people use, from HD-based-T to SDVoE to IPMX to a whole host of different ways in which the network can be leveraged to deliver AV-infused experiences. You had mentioned earlier at the beginning of the podcast the idea of a move toward open standards, away from kind of closed garden approaches. What do you see right now in terms of the landscape with this host of different approaches? As I said, I could rattle off a list of 6 or 7 different standards or approaches for AV over IP or network-based systems. Do you think there's going to be one standard ultimately to rule them all? Are we going to get behind something? Or is it going to continue to be kind of a wild west of different conflicting approaches?
I use the term meet the customer where they're at, right? And I think this is where companies that deliver a solution should be able to meet the customer where they're at. So I don't know if you're going to go to a single standard approach. I see the convergence of what I'd say a very hardware-centric environment moving toward the network. And I think as the network continues to evolve and security parameters, because I think a lot of this has to do with what is the security posture or appetite of every customer is going to be different, from government to your cloud-based, 100% cloud native type companies. And so those security environments are going to be important. So I think, what I'm seeing is that, it's going to depend on every customer. And so the software solution should be flexible enough to adapt to where the customer is at in their journey, right? And to be able to evolve with that journey. I think you're going to see more and more customers migrating what they traditionally saw as a private cloud or an on-prem air-gapped environment to, yes, I can do this in the cloud. And I think as bandwidth costs decrease, as different, we'll call it solutions or services for these different areas within the AV environment catch up, I think you're going to see more and more adoption of these services migrating into the likes of an AWS or an Azure or a GCP, and being able to leverage that, we'll call it cloud instance that you have. So I think there's going to be a lot of, to your term, the Wild West still for quite a while. And I think things are going to start to consolidate over time.
In terms of the cloud, which you just referred to, obviously, as you say, the migration is unmistakable, is undeniable. But I think you also made the valid point that we want to meet organizations and clients and people where they are. How rapidly do you see this migration to the cloud proliferating among clients with whom you work, clients that you see? Do you see a whole lot of organizations that are 100% cloud-based at this point, or is there still some reluctance to move entirely into that arena?
Oh, very, very much so a reluctance. And I think it has to do with the maturation of the leadership within that organization. Some companies are moving very quickly. Some have moved completely. Some sit in what I call more of a hybrid environment. And there's certain applications that, depending on what vertical you live in or what type of, customers you call on, be it the federal government or your, the Airbnbs of the world. I think it really depends on what type of security posture at the end of the day that you're looking at. So to answer your question, I see the AV space moving I'd say they're the laggard in a lot of what's going on. From what I've seen in the IT area, most of the companies that have had large data centers are looking at more and more of the workloads or applications they can move into the cloud because of the cost benefit associated with that elasticity of the cloud. But I see the AV space starting to very quickly adopt. The aha moment, the light bulb going on over what the cloud can provide to those specific applications or those specific areas is becoming very apparent. And I think the more that the AV integrators adapt or adopt, I think you're going to see more the customer speed pick up as well. Because I think a lot of the customers follow the lead of their trusted integrator or their trusted advisory type of partner that they've teed up with. But I think, like I said, as time moves on and more solutions hit the market that are in that software as a service, software defined approach, where the cost benefits are so significant, you're going to see it rapidly pick up. And I'm seeing that happen literally, like I said, just in the last several months, talking to different customers and ways that they're looking to do more with less. Supply chain's been a big part of that, in that they can't source specific hardware pieces and parts that they need to get solutions off the ground. So they're looking for alternatives. Show me a software that allows me to get rid of all of these network switches or these different, we'll call it hardware devices that they need to get that specific solution off the ground. And that's why you're seeing, like I said, more and more software-defined solutions coming to market. And I think as those continue to mature, you're going to see more rapid adoption.
The traditionalism that reigns in the AV integration industry notwithstanding, there's nothing that kind of cuts through that more effectively than a catalyst like the supply chain, where it recognizes the fact that doing things the old way could potentially be incredibly deleterious to your business. So whatever one's affinity for conventional or traditional approaches might be, there sometimes are those catalyzing factors that really force a change, and it's ultimately a change for the positive. Let's just talk a bit about the supply chain, which we've alluded to a couple of different times now. obviously, when you look at enterprises, they're looking for ways to be more innovative, looking for ways to be more agile, they're looking for ways to scale faster, and they don't want their projects to be extended out into the indeterminate future. They want to get their systems up online. They want to be competitive with their peer organizations. Is the supply chain, in your mind, the single most powerful catalyzing force to transform the way integration is done?
No, I mean, I think supply chain is going to resolve itself over time. I think supply chain is just a current challenge. But I do believe the hardware complexion is probably the biggest part. I mean, like I said, let's take supply chain out of the situation right now. I do believe that this industry is fraught with too much hardware. There's a lot of pieces and parts that can be replaced with software. And you hit the two words on the two best words you said was agility and speed. How do you get your projects, get your services, get your productivity, your ROI, your TCO up and running faster? How do I do more with less? How do I get my time to, I call it, the speed in which you get things done? And if you're waiting on hardware or you're dependent on hardware, because hardware fails, hardware comes with support. Hardware comes with a very large energy footprint. And the more software you can bring into that picture, the less hardware you're using, the less energy, the less, the fewer support structures, the fewer downtime pieces and parts that you're having to worry about. So I think there's a lot of what I call soft costs that surround a very hardware-heavy footprint. When you put that into a data center, you've got people that need to manage those hardware components. And like I said, I think the supply chain is a current challenge that's accelerating the adoption of software. But I think in general, the software approach is going to be a much more cost-effective approach for these companies as we evolve into software as a service. I mean, there's a reason, the cloud business is growing at the speed it's growing at. There's a reason customers are adopting SaaS on a much more breakneck pace, and that you're seeing the deprecation of a lot of hardware in certain areas of the industry.
So the supply chain, to just kind of rephrase what you said, is essentially an accelerant in this case, but it is not the prime mover. It is not the ultimate factor. It is accelerating something that inexorably is going to happen in any case.
Absolutely. And I'd say you're probably seeing a lot of the hardware heavy companies out there in this area that sell into the IV environment, probably leveraging the supply chain to place your order now, get ahead of it so you can get in the queue for the 52-week lead time or the, whatever the lead time is. And so, my concern is customers jump into that, situation, buying hardware, getting in the queue earlier now, knowing that the lead times are down the road, instead of investigating more cost-effective ways through software that they could potentially solve these problems and really give themselves an opportunity to learn about or to expose themselves to other solutions that aren't as hardware heavy that they are today.
So as we begin to wrap up the podcast, I want to talk a little bit just in terms of summarizing what we've learned today. Integrators have been very focused on corporate and enterprise for a very long time. It's one of the most robust, if not the single most robust, vertical markets for AV integration. There's always a lot of projects to do. So obviously, when you look at Tier 1, Class A enterprise organizations, integrators want to work in a way that's going to make their organization attractive to that potential client. Because especially if it's a global client that has deployments all over the world, that could be a multi-million-dollar, multi-year kind of a relationship. How can integrators modernize their AV services? How can integrators modernize their approach to be able to be maximally attractive to those enterprise organizations with whom they want to work?
Yeah, I would say take a more evolved, more innovative, disruptive approach to your customers. I think customers are looking for ways to do more with less. And if you're coming to them with the same traditional, hardware-heavy type of architecture or environment, I think you're setting yourself up for disruption. Somebody's going to come in behind you. I saw this happen when, the cloud became very apparent that workloads were leaving to the cloud. The integrators that embraced it, that built practices around the cloud, became very valuable over time. And they actually acquired more customers away from their competition because they were coming to the end user with the new, evolved, more, we'll call it disruptive ways to do more with less, right? I mean, you're coming with that same old traditional message. customers see through that. They're looking for partners that are giving them the opportunity to see what's coming. What does the future look like? How can I improve my environment? How can I become more cost effective in the approach in which I'm taking it? If you're coming in with that same solution that you've been selling them for the last 5 to 10 or 20 years, you're going to get disrupted. So it's time to disrupt yourself before you let the competition disrupt you. Like I said, I saw a lot of traditional resellers in the IT space go out of business because they did not embrace the cloud. They embraced the software as a service model that was coming down the pipe very rapidly. And some of them literally shut their doors. I mean, they still were taking orders, very robust 20, 30 points of business that they were getting, and they couldn't let go of it. And so pivoting early, setting yourself up with a even if it's a section within the company that's focusing on that integration, more modern approach to tackling this AV challenge, you're going to set yourself up for future-proofing your own business as an integrator, as a partner, as somebody who's bringing what I call evolved, more cost-effective and future-proofing type of technology to your customers at the end of the day. They want to see value from a partner and an integrator. They don't want to see the same old, same old.
It's time to disrupt yourself before you let the competition disrupt you. Those are words to live by. I wanted to reiterate that because I think it's critical for the AV Plus audience to bear in mind that you can either be a passive participant in the disruption or you can be an active participant in the disruption and lean into it intentionally. So thank you so much, Jay, for joining us today on the AV Plus podcast. Very illuminating conversation. I hope it really benefits our integrator audience who are looking to optimize their path to success, their chances for success in the years ahead.
It's been a pleasure talking, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to your audience. Thank you.
Thank you once again, Jay Phillips, Chief Revenue Officer with Userful, for joining us today. My name is Dan Ferrisi, Editor-in-Chief with Commercial Integrator and host of the AV Plus podcast. Please check back on commercialintegrator.com each and every Friday for a new edition of the AV Plus podcast, featuring more illuminating and insightful content just like this. Till then, have a great rest of the day, and once again, thank you for tuning in to AV Plus.